Today we're going to talk about shame and how that affects you and everything like that, because I've been writing my story and a lot of it does focus on shame, and I just have so many ideas about everything that's like happened and what causes it and everything. But please do keep in mind that this is all my personal experience, so it might not be the same for other people. It's just what I've gone through and how I felt about things. So anyway, let's get started. For as long as I remember, I felt shame, and I feel like it started before I was even aware of anything. So even as a child, I remember looking at my own photo and I would like scribble on it because I just felt like there was something I hated about the photo of me. Like when I went back to look at this photo years later, I thought, oh my God, that's such a cute photo. Why did I hate it? But at the time, when I was at 3 or whatever age I was, I just remember having this intense hatred to my own photo, and I would get a pen and just scribble over it. I think I even scribbled on my own clothing because I was so annoyed at myself, and I don't even know why that was. That's just a memory that I have. So when I think about like that, I feel like maybe even then the shame has started, because growing up, what happened is I was raised by my grandparents from 1 year old. Before that, my mum was involved, but she then had to go to work, and it was a situation of life and death, basically. If she didn't work, we would all starve, and she just had to, so she had to leave me with my grandparents. And I have a feeling maybe during that time, like maybe it was like, even subconsciously, it was like the loss. Maybe it was the loss of my own mother that like just gave me this feeling that I should be ashamed. I feel like that's what happened, even though I don't know too much about that time. I don't have a lot of memories of that time to know what happened, but I feel like that's maybe the cause of my early shame. So that really affected me in the way that I was very painfully shy, and I was also very quiet. I didn't really want to talk to anybody, and I was scared of how I was scared to even eat a packet of biscuits in front of like classmates. I remember that. It was just something was so embarrassing about, like, if they saw what I ate, I just felt so embarrassed. Like I just felt really stupid and really embarrassed. So that was something that's happened even when I was in preschool or something like that. So it was really early on that I experienced the shame. And then around when I was 6 years old is when I had to move away from my grandparents, whom I formed a very, very close bond with. And I absolutely loved them. But during that time of 6 years old, I had to leave where we were living, and it was like a maybe like a 6 hour trip away. So it wasn't something that we could just visit them whenever. It was very difficult at the time to visit, and we would probably visit once every 6 months. And I'm just gonna wait till the siren goes. Okay, so anyway, we were waiting for 6 months, and I just remember being so like sad and depressed about like when I was going to see them again and everything. It was like the most painful part was being separated from them. And that's when I've noticed that I had this severe like just feeling of shame, and the shame was like gradually got worse over time with different experiences that happened. And I think it was at its tipping point maybe in my teenager years. That was like at the worst of where I felt the shame. So a lot of times I feel like when you feel shame, and the shame I'm talking about is like a core shame. It's like, from my understanding of it, is like there's just this feeling inside you that you're wrong, and that like you're just not good and you're unworthy. It's a feeling that is very hard to shake off. It's not a logical thought, but a feeling. I would even say that the feeling kind of stems from your stomach, because that's like kind of the origin where I see all my feelings begin, which is really weird. It's like I feel it in my stomach. It's like, oh, just that feeling that there's something wrong with me kind of feeling, rather than, oh, like my actions are bad or whatever. You can't even separate your own actions with you as a human. That's how I've always looked at shame. And unfortunately, when you go through certain life experiences, you're most likely to feel that kind of shame, like, oh, there's something wrong with me, like I don't deserve things, I'm really bad, or those negative thoughts. And unfortunately, It's not something that's very easy to get rid of, but I am also an example that it can be done. So I want to share with you how I've been able to kind of overcome it through the years and how I've reached the level I am now, which I'm not 100% happy with, but I am so much better than I used to be. Like, if you saw how I used to be, you'd be absolutely shocked that I am the same person. So that's pretty crazy to think about. And I just remember shame being like this intense emotion that, like, I just feel like I'm wrong. It's like and you get that feeling almost in every interaction you have with other people. So when I talk to people that I don't know, when I speak to people, maybe especially people that I really admire, I would automatically feel like, oh, I'm not worthy to talk to them, or oh, why would they want to talk to me when I'm so crap, or something like that. It was just be like this feeling of unworthiness in front of them. And that's also with people who are better at doing certain things than I am, and I always feel that way too. Like, I had for years trouble doing my university degree because I originally was doing a teaching degree where we had to go and do these go to the classrooms and teach the kids. And what really made me unable to continue is teaching in front of like a very experienced teacher. And for some reason, like, the idea that I was not as experienced or that I was a beginner just made me feel so shameful and stupid that I just couldn't continue. Like, I got to the point where I just felt so stupid. And that's a very similar thing happened too when I was answering phone calls for this company that I was working for at one stage. And the weirdest thing is, like, they give you a script to say. Like, when you answer the phone, you have to say, this is whatever from this company, and you say your name. And you think that that's a very normal thing, right? That's like something that all the people in the office say, and there should be no problems with me saying it. But for some reason, when I said it, I just felt so embarrassed and stupid. And it was like the idea of other people hearing me say that, I just felt overwhelmingly stupid. And for the longest time, I never really understood why I felt that way. Or I tried to figure it out. Like, why do I feel so intensely embarrassed when I say these kind of things? Even though the other people are saying the same thing. And I'm not looking at them feeling like, oh, they're an embarrassment. But for some reason, just for me, I feel like it was an embarrassment that I was saying it. And I felt like people were looking at me with this embarrassed, like, oh, she's so embarrassing kind of thing. Like, I always thought people would just see me as an embarrassment. So that was another thing I noticed, is that just the difficulties with just saying things in front of people. I've always had trouble with that. Like, when I think about, like, I've had troubles with talking in front of the phone, like talking with my friends on the phone when people were in the house. Like, it doesn't even, like, the conversation can just be very, very random. And like, but what friends will notice is if there's someone in the house, my conversation becomes like, yep, okay, yeah, right. It just becomes like that. Whereas if nobody's in the house, I'm free to talk, and I say a lot of things. So I think even friends have noticed over the years that when I have this two different sides of me, one is this talkative side and one is the quiet side. Whereas if I feel like anyone's watching me or listening to me, I'm just filled with so much thoughts about what they must be thinking. And I always think that, like, and the weirdest thing, okay, this is probably the weirdest thing. But when you think about it, it's not so weird because I will think of other examples. But what I found really interesting is that I just didn't even like the idea of people thinking positive thoughts about me. Like, the idea of someone thinking something, whether they're thinking it in a positive or negative way, both affected me equally. Like, I couldn't even handle them thinking positive things about me, because when you have that mindset that you're wrong, you almost can't accept that positive thing as well. So whenever people would say positive things, I kind of just almost let it fly over my head. It's like, oh, they don't know anything, they don't know really. Like, that's just how I felt. Like, I just felt like they don't know the full story to think that I'm really great. So, whatever they're thinking is wrong, is basically what I'm thinking. And that's happened. That's probably why I find it very hard to speak in front of people. I find it very hard to film when people are in the house. I find it very difficult to do anything where I had to talk and there's someone that's listening. Like, the idea of not knowing what they're thinking is so horrifying to me that I still, to this day, haven't been able to overcome that fear, that I have to like film when I have to send people out of the house so I can film a video like this, because it's so hard for me to be able to say my thoughts if someone else is here. And you'll probably notice in videos where I'm outside, or I'm like in front of like other people, or I'm out and about, I'm very quiet and I sound different. Like I just don't sound as loud as my usual self. You'll feel it a bit. I feel like you'll definitely notice. It's all come down to this shameful feeling that I've had that's just stuck with me for the years. And for the longest time, I wanted to figure out how we can overcome that, because imagine if your life would be if you don't feel the shame, like if you don't feel that you're wrong. Imagine all the endless possibilities, all the things you'd be able to do, and of course all the relationships in your life would be so much better, because I bet you one of the main problems that you'll face, like I did, is because I felt shame and really bad about myself. I'm like constantly looking for a reason why people must not like me. So it's like with anything that happens, I'll be digging for that reason, and you'll definitely see that as something that I do even now. And it's something that I'm working on, but it's not that easy. Like a lot of things, I think when you're programmed to think a certain way since you were a child, it is very hard to just turn it around. But my thing is that I always try my best every day, and that's what's important. If I can go through one day and just feel kind of better about myself, then that to me is worth it. And I want to share the secret of how I did that. So I'll never sit here and say that, oh, I've got all this figured out, I love myself now, oh, everything about me is great, I don't feel shame. That's not how it works. You'll always get moments where you feel that shame again, and things will flood back to you. Maybe it's a trigger of some kind of like event, or like your reaction, or whatever it is that for you that will just do it. And unfortunately, during those times, you just have to get through it, and then just realize that tomorrow is a better day for you to try again. And don't beat yourself up over like a mistake that you've made that you regret but you couldn't help because of your emotions or something like that. So that's the best thing I can suggest, is not to just dwell on like if you did something today that you feel so ashamed about, just remember that tomorrow you can try again, you can do better, and don't hold yourself to, like, don't hate yourself for something you did. So that's what I try to do. But anyway, so my shame has always been just so debilitating, is how I would say it. Like all the times in groups, in places that I've been struggling with, has to do with my shame. And I noticed that one of the most difficult things that I've noticed is during group conversations seems to be affecting me the most, because whenever there's like more than one person, I feel like I shouldn't even be in the conversation. Like I feel like I'm not important enough to put myself in the conversation, so people shouldn't even look at me. Like I feel awkward if people were looking at me, if I were to say something and people were looking at me. I don't know why, it's just with more than one person had that effect on me. But it also depends on who the people are. Like if there was like a group of people I don't know at all, then it's definitely much harder. If I knew every single person in the group, then it would be very different. Like I would be far more comfortable to talk. But if there was even one person I didn't know in the group, then that's when all the horrible feelings would happen, and I end up just being very silent in the group. And then that will sometimes result in feeling left out, because people will get that vibe from you. They'll just feel it from you that you don't seem to want to talk to them, so they won't want to talk to you. So it's kind of just going back and forth. You will feel uncomfortable around them, and then they will sense that and they'll feel uncomfortable around you. So what end up happening is a lot of times you'll just feel like people just hate you, and you'll just take that as a reason. Oh, they're not talking to me because they must think there's something wrong with me. But in reality, that's not really what they're thinking. They're probably thinking like, why is that person so distant towards me? It's like, oh, I feel a bit uncomfortable because they don't seem to like me that much. That's what they're probably thinking, right? Because a lot of times that's what happened too, where I've had people who seem to look at me with some kind of like dislike, so I just feel really awkward and scared to talk to them. So that I feel like is a problem that I've always had. So anyway, sometimes I feel like shame can be caused by negative experiences in childhood that's very hard for you to like get rid of. So the only way that I find that helps me is you have to train your mind very, very, very consistently. It has to be a very consistent thing to know yourself in a way that you didn't before. So how do you do that? You can't look at yourself like just because you see yourself in a certain way that you feel like, oh, that's me. What you have to really do is kind of step away from yourself and see yourself from a different point of view. You have to see yourself from a different point of view in order to change the way you feel about yourself. There's no other way besides that, because you'll always find that you're very, very biased towards yourself. You'll think things about you that you don't think about other people, and you just have to step out of that to see what you're doing that's biased, because you sometimes you won't even notice what you're doing until you step out and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm being so mean to myself. Why am I saying these kind of things? I wouldn't say that to my own child. I wouldn't say that to my friend. I wouldn't say that to anybody, but I'm saying it to myself. Why is that? You have to really think about that, because when you step out, you have to imagine yourself as someone else. You have to think like, if I was my best friend and I'm talking to them like you have to imagine you as a different person. Sometimes that's the only way it works. Like, what would I say to them? Would I be ashamed that they were, they went through certain childhood experiences? Would I think that they were wrong because they went through certain things? Or would I feel like compassion towards them? Would I it's like you just have to think of it from a different perspective. You're always going to feel so negative towards yourself if you just think of you as you, if you know what I mean. Like, it's just hard for you to step out of that. But as soon as you start step out of you and you start seeing yourself from a different point of view, or even as a different person, you'll start seeing the way you think is very, very biased, and you'll think like, oh, I just told myself that I'm ugly and nobody would like me. But in reality, that's not what I would say to my friend. I wouldn't say to my friend that she's ugly and I wouldn't and nobody would like her because she's ugly. I wouldn't say that to my son. I wouldn't ever say things like, oh, you're just so unlovable. Like, just nobody would, you'll realize what you're doing to yourself. And that's when you can slowly start changing the way you think, by consistently trying to train your mind. And it's not easy. I absolutely have to tell you that it's going to take work and it's going to take time, and it's not something you can just switch on and off. I used to always be really upset, whenever I read, get advice, oh, just think more positive or something, and I would just be so upset, I don't know how to do that. It's like, you're telling me to think good about myself, but I don't know how. That's the problem I've always had. So in my past, all this time, I just want to work out how we can do that. And my best method is really to try to see yourself from a different point of view. And I know this is very risky, and I know not everyone might feel up to it, but I also think it's very important to see yourself the way other people see you. And what I mean by that is sometimes you maybe just film yourself talk and put yourself through that thing where you're listening to yourself, because that's very important. What you'll find is that you have an image of yourself that's very, very in your mind. You have this certain image of how you look, but you really don't know, because you don't see yourself when you talk. You don't see yourself when you laugh, or you don't see yourself when you're giggling or having fun or whatever it is. You don't see yourself that way. Others see you. So just remember that your eyes going outwards, so you can't see yourself the way. So the only real way to see yourself is by capturing it on video or something like that, because you can't even be in front of the mirror 24/7. It's not going to work that way. It's like you'll look at the mirror and you go, why can't I see myself rolling my eyes? It's because when you're looking at the mirror, your eyes are still. It's kind of perspective. So you'll never really see yourself in certain ways unless you record it and you watch it back. And I recommend that a lot, because that will kind of get you used to who you are. You're going to get to know you more by watching yourself. You're going to actually probably like things about you that you never thought you would. Because in the past, I just assumed that I looked a certain way, because I always thought because I looked similar, in some ways similar to my biological father, who's very abusive, I thought I was ugly because of that. Because I was like, oh, I look like him. Who would want to look like him? He's the ugliest person ever. So to me, I would just feel like, because I look like that, I must be ugly. That's just what I thought. But then what I realized was when I watched some of my own videos back, I see myself having fun or doing like just doing fun things or like, just laughing or something. And I actually think, oh, I don't look nearly as bad as I thought. Like, why did I think I looked so horrible when here I look pretty well off? Like, not well off. What am I thinking? I look pretty cool, man. Like, it was just really surprising for me to discover that I didn't hate myself the way I thought I would when I really got to know how I looked or how I sounded. It's just the skill, and it's just like putting yourself through it for a very long period of time will gradually get you used to yourself. So I know it's going to be very cringy in the beginning. You'll probably hate it, and you'll probably like on camera you'll probably sound very awkward and all of that. Yes, I understand that. You'll probably go through that, but if you just keep going, if you just don't give up, keep going, put yourself through it all the time, just keep watching yourself, you'll eventually, hopefully, will start feeling more positive about yourself. So that's really a method that works well. That and getting to know myself in a different point of view. Like if I imagine me as someone else, would I actually say that to that person? Then you have to realize that if you're being very unfair towards yourself, you have to really question why you're doing that. Like, why am I acting the way I am to myself that I wouldn't for someone else? And you have to really think, okay, so then I have to think more towards like how I would say this to a friend. So instead of telling yourself that you suck or something, you'd have to say like, you don't suck, you've just been through some horrible experiences. You just really, really need to, whatever that you're thinking to yourself, you have to start saying that to yourself. And sometimes even saying it out loud or saying it, like maybe even saying it into the camera and have yourself listen to it back would really help. And another thing I find very, very helpful is by listening to other positive people that kind of has that energy that makes you feel good about yourself, because there are some people in the world who have that ability and will talk in a way that will make you really question your own beliefs and like just make you feel more positive. I feel like it's very important to pay a lot more attention to that and not pay attention to people who make you feel more stupid or like worse or whatever. And believe me, there are also people who will do that. And I'll always go back to the time when I was like doing this like project with someone in university, and I just remember that they would always make jokes about how stupid I was. It was like this this snark, like remark or something. It was just like things that they would randomly say. It's like that just kind of like made me feel like, oh, I'm really stupid. And I just kept feeling that way until like I just felt like my self-esteem go down and down and down more the more I was hanging around her. And then gradually when I stopped hanging around her, because the project finished and we didn't have to work together anymore, and then I slowly discovered just like how bad that would have, like that affected me all these times. So like when you stop hanging around people that make you feel really bad, you start to like almost see that, oh, they're really affecting me. And unfortunately sometimes it could even be your own family that makes you feel really bad about yourself. And that's the worst part, because it's hard to just cut your family off. I understand that. Like I grew up with like Asian parents who didn't really know how to like compliment kids, you know what I mean? Like it's like Asian parents have this thing where they like to compare and stuff, so it's very hard. Like you pretty much grew up like them saying like, look at that kid, look at how great they are, and look at you're just gonna end up being their garbage person. Like, that's the kind of stuff they say, and it's very hard to kind of think positive about yourself when you've been told that your whole life. And you just have to remember that you just have to like first really like get yourself out of these situations where you're always listening to them saying stuff about you. You really have to kind of slowly get out of that, because you'll feel that you'll always have that like sinking negative feeling. If you're around that, you'll never truly be able to feel free from it. So that's something that, like, if you're living in a bad spot where you're constantly told this, it's going to be very difficult for you to ever think differently. So that's like the number one thing that I would suggest that is working towards. And I know it's hard, like not everyone, especially with age and everything, with like money, it's very hard. Like I understand that, but it's also important to just be listening to people who really, really helps to bring that positive energy out. And you can do that every single day. It really helps that if you listen to that same, like similar things, it doesn't have to be the same, because I know I don't like to listen to the exact same thing like 3 times in a row. I do like to hear a variation of it, but I do find it's very helpful, and it even be good to put that on while you take a nap or something, so you're just hearing that in your, almost in your subconscious state. I feel like that could help, but I don't know, I've never did experiments on that. But anyway, it's just like something that really consider doing, because it will really change the way you start seeing yourself. And you really just want to, like, what you really want is that self-awareness, like, oh, I'm doing the thing again. Hey, I'm doing that negative thing where I'm talking to myself negatively. I gotta stop. Like, if you notice and you recognize that you're doing that, you can stop yourself, and you can say, like, you can actually start, like, maybe even talk to yourself very, very loudly, like out loud. You can say to yourself, hey, like, what am I saying to myself? Like, this is how I should be thinking. And then you'll suddenly find that your brain will start getting confused and like thinking like, oh, maybe I'm making a mistake. Maybe I shouldn't be thinking that. And then that's very important, because you want to just be aware of that. And also, I think it's very, very important to have other people around you, close to you, be aware of that too, especially if it's your partner, if it's like significant other. It's very important, because what ends up happening a lot of times is that arguments will happen because you feel like crap about yourself, and then you're going to say stuff and they're going to defend themselves, and the argument will become very focused on you accusing and them defending. And that's not a good way to ever like resolve the argument or get to the bottom of the situation, which is really that you're just often, because you feel shameful, you would be looking for a reason why they're hating on you or something like that. So instead, getting them aware of the situation so that they can work on that aspect of it, rather than like saying, oh, I'm not doing that, why do you always accuse me? You know, it's like when 2 people are arguing over that, it's very hard to get to the actual root cause of the problem. So you want them to be aware of it as well, because when they're aware of it, they can say, oh, like, you know what, I noticed you're always looking for ways, like, reasons why I hate you. Like, let's talk about like the deep reasons why. Like, what have you gone through? You know, like, when you can get to that stage, you'll find that the conversations are so very helpful, and they'll really, really just make things easier. You want that kind of conversation rather than the arguments over just how the other person must be feeling. That's been my experience this whole time, is that really helps me. So when you think about shame, you have to think like, okay, I feel like the shame because I feel like I'm wrong. But if I'm in that situation, like, and sometimes even like being exposed to certain things, or when you go through certain abuse in your childhood, you might even feel shame for like having that experience. But then you have to realize if it was your own child who like someone took advantage of, how would you feel towards like the child? Would you be embarrassed of them? Would you feel ashamed of them? Or would you absolutely hate the abuser for doing that and want to protect the child? And I just almost want you to think of yourself as how you would a child. Like, you know, you'd want to protect yourself, like do wonderful to you. Don't hate on you because of all the stuff that you've experienced. Please, that's just such an important thing, because when you feel more confident, what's going to happen is you'll feel much happier to share things. You'll be so much more just energetic, and you'll want to do things that scares you a little, because you'll find that if you're feeling shameful, you'll be very, very nervous to approach people. You probably would feel unworthy to meet someone that may always been someone that you wanted to meet, or something like that. You would just put it off because you feel like, oh, why should I bother? Like, I'm ugly or something. And that would be your excuse why you couldn't like meet that person or make the video or whatever that you want to do. You'll probably come up with some reason like, oh, I'm just too ugly for it, or oh, I'm not worthy enough to say that. And what that does is it puts you in the thought trap that like that you're not worthy. And honestly, that's one of the worst things that you can do to yourself, because what you'll find that is a lot of people can relate to your story, and if you're able to offer insights or anything, it could really help them. Like, I still remember how alone I felt during the years that I was going through a lot of the struggles that I did, especially with anxiety and stuff. I always felt so alone, and I felt like I must have been an absolute crazy person for going through what I did. I just felt like, oh, like, I bet nobody else understood, and I just felt alone, and people didn't understand, and I would try to explain it, but they would often overreact and worry or panic, and it would just make the anxiety worse. And really, the one thing that people just want so badly is some understanding. And if you can share that with someone, they'll see you as their hero. I bet you that. Like, because all the people that help me in some ways, I see them as the most important, most greatest people that ever existed. And it's never about, like, I would never just think someone is randomly ugly for the sake of being randomly ugly. There has to be a deeper reason for me to really dislike them. Like, you could, on the road, you could be like, oh, this person's more attractive than that. But it's very superficial. You're not going to really feel too much towards a certain person for their looks until you really know them, and then that's when your feeling towards them will either be positive or negative. You'll always find that people you don't know, you have a very neutral feeling about them. You don't really just look at people you don't know at all in like a negative or positive way unless they've done something or said something that makes you feel that way. So you might notice that. Like, if you've seen someone just like randomly, like you go on the road and you see people, you're not going to automatically hate someone unless maybe something about them reminded you, or they're being angry or something. Maybe that will trigger something, but you're not going to ever just think, oh, that person's too ugly, so I hate them. Like, that's not how we usually think. I don't feel like that's how we think. So a lot of times we have to get rid of that thought in our own head so that we don't think that people dislike us because we're too ugly, because that's just such a mind trap. It's like, we don't think like that. Why would other people just be judging us for our looks only? You know, it's really to do with how they feel around you, because as soon as I get to know someone and, you know, I either have this feeling of like slight defensiveness, like, oh, a little bit of a fear, that's, you know, maybe you're a little bit afraid of them. Maybe they just say something that makes you feel a little uncomfortable, or you feel so cozy, happy, and just so free to express yourself around them. And you'll find that those people are the ones that don't judge you, are just very kind, and will just be very supportive and not ever like show judgment towards you. You'll feel that way. It's always, you'll feel positive about someone because of how they make you feel, I think. Like, that's just how I've always experienced things. Like, I've never just disliked a person because they were so ugly. Like, that's just never been my thing. It's always like how they act. And a lot of times, unfortunately, the problem is when someone perceives that they're ugly, when sometimes they think that they're ugly or they're unworthy or whatever it is, that they're negative things that they feel, what ends up happening is it will also show in their behavior. So a person who think that they're unlovable or ugly is more likely to show kind of distance towards people. And that's what I did when I was younger. Like, I because I thought people wouldn't like me, I would just keep a distance. And I noticed that people always seemed to keep this distance with me because they could feel it. You know, the vibe you send off, I feel like people could totally feel it. So what's ended up happening is they would be very cautious around me, and I would be around them, and there's just this barrier in between us, right? So it's always those situations. But the problem is, like, if you feel ugly, you're most likely to think that people won't like you, so you might just harden yourself, or like just, it's like harden, Metapod, harden. It's like, I'm not gonna talk to anyone, I don't want to know people that's gonna hate me, right? That's what you're thinking. But in reality, what that is doing is making people feel cautious around you and feel almost afraid to approach you because they can feel that little bit of a wall that you've built. And that's the problem a lot of times. So you have to realize that people are not going to hate you just because of your looks. People are not going to hate you because you have a couple of pimples. I always just thought like, oh, it's the end of the world if I have a few breakouts, oh my god. And then it's funny because I have this image of how horrible I look and everything, and then it's funny because sometimes I'll just film a video anyway. I'm like, oh yeah, these days I just film a video, and then I watch back, I'm like, oh wait a minute, that little pimple there doesn't make me look nearly as bad as I thought. Like, I thought I'd look absolutely so horrendous that people couldn't even like open their like eyes in front of me. But when I look back, it's like, oh, it's just like this little red spot. It's not that bad. But your mind, in your mind, it's always a lot worse than what you're imagining. Like the mind just likes to have a mind of its own, is what I like to say. It likes to think that things are a lot worse. Like, it's funny because I just always remember, like, sometimes I'll be picking a pimple and it's a really bad idea. Don't do that if you can't help it. Like, my hands are so bad when it comes to pimples. Like, I'd be picking it and then all of a sudden I have this idea that my pimple looks absolutely horrendous. It's like this ugly thing on my face. Oh my god, it's ruined my face. It was so horrible. I just feel it. It's like, oh. And then I look in the mirror, it's like, oh wait, it's just this tiny little spot. It's not even that big. So I'm like, what was I so worried about? Like, why was I thinking like this was like the end all be all whatever thing? So a lot of times you'll find that your mind will try to make you feel like it's a lot worse than what it is. You really just have to have like perspective. Like, okay, it's not as bad. I need to look. Like, that's not as bad. And a lot of times what you'll find is that we're so focused on our own problems, right? We're like, oh my god, people are going to see this, people will see that. Oh, what if like they notice this about us? But in reality, they might be noticing their own problems, maybe fearing their own things. So like, you have to just realize that everyone will have problems that they fear, and so try not to spend too much time worrying what people will think, because they're probably not thinking about it. Like, a lot of times I'll be embarrassed about something, like speaking in front of people and stuff, but then I remember myself, is that what happens is I don't really remember people's random conversations out and about. Like, I'll be sitting on a bus and people might be saying something and like, or whatever, like I'm so embarrassed of ever like talking out loud in front of people, right? But I don't even remember at all other people's conversations. It's like during that time, like maybe I'll remember it, like maybe like, yeah, that like that conversation is like interesting or something, but then after 24 hours it's gone. Like the memory is gone. Like the event is not significant enough unless they're actually like, you know, having a huge argument, then yeah, I'll probably remember that. But if it was just like a normal like conversation stuff, I'll likely forget about it in 24 hours. It's like I don't even remember who I saw yesterday or the day before on the street. So why are we so worried on the street? You know, it's like we have to just think sometimes from the other person's point of view. I know it's hard. I know it's something that needs to be trained to do that. It's not something that's easily like you can't just do that as easily as you think. So it does take practice. But I do feel very hopeful that it can be done if you practice hard enough, because it's just so cool when you reach that point when you're like, oh wow, I don't feel as bad about myself as I used to. I don't have that negative feeling like I used to. In fact, you know, the coolest thing is sometimes you start feeling almost a little positive about yourself. And that's crazy. It's like, wow, who am I? What did I do to myself? Like sometimes that happens. But recently, like there are some times where I'm like really like proud of something I've done, and I'd be like, oh wow, like look at what I've been able to achieve. I'm actually feeling proud of myself. Whereas other times, you know, I might go back to the, oh, you must hate me. But you know, it's great that I have these different modes. It's great that I'm not just thinking negative. So that's a huge change from how it used to be. Sometimes I'll also look at why is it that sometimes we have trouble with positive compliments as well. And I think about it, and it actually reminds me of how if you see a lot of Asian kids have very huge difficulties telling their parents they love them. It just sounds really awkward, or even hugs are very difficult. And I feel like it's the same kind of thing. Like when you're programmed to think a certain way, it's very hard to change your mind. You'll feel like, oh, I can't even accept compliments because that's just not what I'm used to. So that's why I've always had trouble accepting compliments, especially from my own family. It's really weird to me. It's like, oh my god, I can't handle it. And you have to realize like sometimes, oh wow, like what is going on? I even can't handle positive compliments, and it's important to really dig into why you can't handle it. Maybe it's just that you're so used to negative reinforcement that getting something positive just feels so weird to you that your stomach clenches up. That's how I've felt a lot of the times. And yes, shame is just such a dangerous emotion because it can just be so overwhelming, and you'll just find that like a lot of times in the past I didn't do things because I was ashamed. Like I felt it was very hard for me to share my personal story because I feel ashamed in a way that it happened. Like, it took me a lot of years to deal with the shame of something happening. And you'll find that a lot of times that's what many people feel, is that they feel ashamed for having gone through that. But what you realize that is you would never feel that way about someone else, but you do about yourself. So we need to change that about ourselves. We have to like try to give ourselves that, like, that talk, like, talk to yourself. That's not something that's normal to feel. Like, just imagine if I was someone else, would you think that? Like, we all know how protective we are with kids, right? With our kids, we're very protective. We want to keep them safe. We don't want them to go through any kind of abuse. So you have to remember that about yourself too. You have to almost treat yourself like a little kid who you want to protect. And that's very important. I know it's going to be really awkward and hard and maybe almost impossible, but please at least try to do that. It's just very helpful when it comes to like dealing with all the shameful feelings that you go through. And everyone deals with shame differently and everyone has different shames. So I'm just speaking from my own experience of the shame that I felt growing up. It was just like this intense feeling where like everything I did was embarrassing. So it was hard. Like, I remember one of the things that I always had trouble was kind of sharing how I felt about something. So what I end up saying to someone would be like, I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to express it. But in reality, I didn't know how to say it. It's just that I felt really embarrassed about it, that I felt stupid to say out what my feelings were or my thoughts were. And you just have to remember how much other people could affect you. So you need to get out of all those situations. And you have to keep filling your head, like it sounds almost like filling your head, like fill it with information, positive information. That's going to really help you, because the more you do it, the more slower progress you'll find that you're going to reach progress if you actually just really work on it. It's going to take a lot of effort to get to where you want to, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it takes years and years and years, but at least if you can figure something out and you can share it, that's also going to be really amazing, because think of all the people you'll be able to help. And that's probably why I'm making these podcasts, because it's like I'm realizing my own secrets. And if someone else is feeling unworthy and horrible about themselves, maybe this might help them. And that's just really makes me feel very happy if I can find some ways to help, because I knew how much I would have loved to have stopped feeling the way I did for all these years. And now it's like finding that way that helps me is almost like uncovering the secret technique, and I just want to share it. It's really exciting. And yeah, so please also, if something works for you that you've never experienced before, or you discover a secret that really helps you feel good about yourself when you've always felt bad, just remember that sharing it will be so wonderful. And think of all the people you'd be able to help in their daily life, because I know how much different my life would have been if I would just be able to not hate myself so much in my earlier years. If I was able to feel more confident in my abilities, I probably would have started many things many years ago rather than wait and waste time, because I just felt like I was not worthy to start, or that I sucked too much, or people were going to dislike me and stuff. And you just have to like let go of the negative thoughts that other people have, because a lot of times other people will want to think or say negative things about you to make them feel better as well. Because when you think about it, like during my worst times, I remember how much I wanted to feel like, oh, I'm not as bad as some other people. So like thinking of other people's shortcomings always made me feel like, oh, maybe I'm not so bad. So a lot of people might be in that boat as well, that they're thinking of all these things that, oh, if I could just point out other people's flaws, maybe I'll feel a bit better about myself. So just remember that before you take any of what they're saying too seriously. So don't think that everything people say about you is 100% true, because a lot of times they don't know you, and they don't, they probably don't know anything about what you're going through. So I like to think that for myself as well. So it's like I just try to do my best to share whatever knowledge I've gained and stuff. And I know like sometimes people might think negative, and that's fine, because they don't know the full story or whatever. And even sometimes I acknowledge that I'm not as great as I'd like to be, but I also know that it's important to have moments where you just know that, okay, I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. That's the thing. Nobody's perfect. I remember in the past, I used to be so upset when I make mistakes. I'd just be so angry at myself. It's like, oh, I'm horrible for doing this. And then I just remember hearing that nobody in the world is perfect. Like nobody is perfect. So we cannot expect perfection on ourselves. We can't expect to never make mistakes because we're humans, That's just something that we all do. Like, that's what I try to remember whenever I have a situation where I do something or say something that I regret or really hate myself for, because honestly, I truly do believe that you're your worst critic, because you'll come up with things to say about yourself that other people haven't even dreamed of. That's what I've done, So a lot of times, by just realizing that, you can change your own narrative, and that's really important. So that's basically what I have to say about shame. I know that different people will see shame in different ways. I'm just speaking from my shame experience, and I just hope that something will work for you so that you don't feel that shame feeling that you shouldn't exist or anything like that, because nobody in the world should feel like that. Honestly, I just feel like we should all feel good about ourselves. Like, that's the thing I wish everyone did, because it's like, if we felt good about ourselves, there would be so much less hate, because we wouldn't feel like we need to drag others down. If we felt good about ourselves, we'll just genuinely want others to be happy too. That's what I've discovered now, is that as I'm feeling better about myself, I'm feeling so happy when other people are getting love and, respect and stuff. And what I noticed before was, whenever that happened in the past, when I used to feel really bad about myself, and I would just feel really jealous and like, just, oh, if only I get that, what did they do to deserve it? That's just how you think when you would like feeling jealous. And now when I'm getting into that better place where I'm like feeling better about myself, I feel genuinely happy to make other people feel good. And that's what you'll notice as well. And that's like, if you feel like it's just like, oh, you hate everyone and you just want to make people feel bad, just remember that is just own negative self-image as well. Like, that's very important. Like, it will just make you feel so much better. So try to do what I say. Like, no, I sound so horrible. Like, try to do what I say. No, try to do something that might work, such as just talk to yourself like you would someone that you care about. That's the only thing that I feel like would really work very well. And you have to do that consistently. Don't just do it once and forget about it. That probably won't work too well. So yeah, I really just hope that works, and hopefully you're able to overcome any kind of shame or bad feeling about yourself. And please let me know if anything really works for you. How do you deal with it? I'd love to hear from you. So thank you so much for watching.